October 3rd, 1918, northern France. 194 American soldiers are trapped in a forest ravine, surrounded on all sides by German forces. Their own artillery, their own army, is shelling them by mistake. They have no working radio, no working phone line. Every runner they send out is shot before he makes it 20 feet. They have exactly one option left. A bird. I know what you're thinking. A bird? Really? That's the big save? Stick with me. Because in the next 9 minutes, you're going to understand why this particular bird has a stuffed body on display at the Smithsonian. A Wikipedia page longer than most generals, and a name that American soldiers whispered like a prayer. This is the true story of Cher Ami and the single flight that decided whether 194 men lived or died. Let's rewind. To understand why a pigeon was mankind's last hope in 1918, you need to understand something most people get completely wrong about World War I. This wasn't a war of drones and satellites. It was a war fought in mud, in trenches, with technology that was brand new and painfully unreliable. Radios existed, but they were heavy, they broke constantly, and enemy forces could intercept the signals. Telephone lines got cut by shellfire within hours. Human runners got mowed down by machine guns before they crossed a single field. So the U.S. Army Signal Corps turned to something that had been used since the days of the Roman Empire. Carrier pigeons. Yes, the same bird currently judging you from a park bench for that half-eaten sandwich was once considered elite military hardware. These weren't random pigeons plucked off the street. They were bred for one purpose: to fly home, fast, no matter what. A trained carrier pigeon could hit speeds of over 60 miles per hour, navigate through smoke, gunfire, and storms, and find its way back to its loft from over 100 miles away. The Army trusted these birds with something more valuable than gold: information that could win or lose a battle. Cher Ami, French for dear friend, was one of these birds, raised and trained by American pigeon fanciers and donated to the U.S. Army Signal Corps. By the fall of 1918, this pigeon had already flown 12 successful missions through combat zones. 12 times, this bird had proven it would fly home no matter what stood in the way. But nothing had prepared Cher Ami for what was about to happen in the Argonne Forest. Because on the other side of the lines, 194 American soldiers were about to become one of the most famous trapped units in military history. They had a name that would go down in legend. They were about to become known as the Lost Battalion. Major Charles Whittlesey and his men, soldiers from the 77th Infantry Division, had pushed forward into the Argonne Forest as part of a massive Allied offensive. It was a bold advance. Too bold. Within hours, German forces closed in behind them, cutting them off completely from the rest of the American line. No supplies. No reinforcements. No way out. For nearly 5 days, they held their position under relentless German attack, running out of food, running out of ammunition, running out of medical supplies for the wounded piling up around them. Men were dying by the hour. And just when you think it can't possibly get worse, it does. Because their own artillery, trying to support the offensive, didn't know the exact coordinates of the Lost Battalion. American shells started raining down directly on top of them. Imagine that terror for a second. You've survived days of enemy fire. You're wounded, starving, surrounded, and now the shells trying to kill you are being fired by your own countrymen. Whittlesey needed to send one message, immediately, or every man in that ravine was going to die, either from German bullets or American shells. He had already sent 2 pigeons that day with desperate pleas for help. Both were shot out of the sky before they'd flown more than a few hundred feet. The Germans had figured out exactly what these birds meant, and they had riflemen watching the skies specifically to kill them. There was one bird left in the basket: Cher Ami. Whittlesey scribbled a message on a tiny piece of paper and clipped it to the pigeon's leg. It read, in part, "We are along the road parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." Then he released the bird, and everyone watched, holding their breath. as Cher Ami climbed into a sky thick with gunfire. And almost immediately, disaster, German riflemen spotted the bird instantly. Gunfire erupted from every direction. And then, right before the eyes of the soldiers who were counting on this bird to save their lives, Cher Ami was hit. The pigeon dropped out of the sky like a stone. The men watched in horror. Their last hope had just fallen into enemy territory. But here's the thing almost nobody expects about what happened in the next 60 seconds. Because Cher Ami wasn't done. Not even close. And what this bird did next would become one of the most extraordinary feats in military history. One that doctors, historians, and even modern veterinarians still find almost impossible to believe. Somehow, against every law of biology, against every expectation, Cher Ami lifted back off the ground. The bird had been shot through the chest, blinded in one eye. And a German bullet had nearly severed one of its legs entirely. The leg carrying the message canister was hanging on by a single tendon. And Cher Ami kept flying. 25 miles, through smoke, through gunfire, through a battlefield designed to kill anything that moved across it. 25 miles in roughly 25 minutes, flying by most accounts on one leg, with a chest wound and a missing eye. Think about your own day for a second. Think about the last time you gave up on something because it was too hard. Now picture a bird. A bird with a brain smaller than your thumbnail, physically shot apart, refusing to stop flying until the job was done. Cher Ami made it back to the loft at division headquarters. The bird collapsed the moment it landed. Signal Corps soldiers rushed over and found the message canister still barely attached to the mangled leg. They carefully removed it, read Whittlesey's desperate plea, and within minutes, American command halted the artillery barrage. The shelling on the Lost Battalion stopped immediately. 2 days later, American forces broke through German lines and rescued the survivors. The men who walked out alive did so because one message got through. One flight. One bird that refused to die before the job was finished. Army medics went to extraordinary lengths to save Cher Ami's life. They couldn't save the leg, it was amputated, but they carved the bird a small wooden prosthetic leg, and Cher Ami lived for almost another year, becoming something close to a celebrity. The pigeon was shipped back to the United States, awarded the French Croix de Guerre for heroic service, and inducted into a hall of fame most people don't even know exists. And yes, before you ask, Cher Ami's actual, real, taxidermied body is on permanent display today at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. You can go look this bird in its one remaining eye right now if you want to. Here's what gets me about this story. Cher Ami didn't understand medals, didn't understand heroism, didn't understand the concept of 194 lives. This was an animal, running on instinct and training, doing the only thing it knew how to do. Fly home. And yet that single, blind, bleeding, one-legged flight changed the outcome of history for nearly 200 families who got their sons, husbands, and fathers back. Sometimes the difference between total tragedy and survival isn't a general, or a weapon, or a strategy. Sometimes it's one small, wounded creature that simply refuses to stop. If this story moved you, there's an even stranger one waiting, about the animals armies weaponized in World War II that make Cher Ami's story look almost normal. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.